It's time to flee from Mummy in Map2D, run like an Egyptian. You know, it baffles me that it's even been made into a complete map instead of the tail end of the last one. It's pretty much just straight lines with enemies and explosions everywhere and a timer for the exit. Yeah, it can be a little thrilling, but it's very uninspired as a level design, and it's not like it has to be like this. 0 hours probing the depths is a timed map on that game, and it's significantly more fleshed out. It may be on GBA, but that's no excuse when other maps at least have a lot more going for them. It's time to wake the Sphinx in Map2-7, Pyramental Wakeup. This map can charitably be described as a puzzle boss fight, but honestly it's very disappointing, both for the map and the boss. The actual map design is basically just running back and forth between two areas through very linear hallways that are like straight lines. The boss itself, you basically just shoot until the game tells you it's invincible, so you press 2 buttons and lure it into a crusher. I'm reminded of another puzzle boss on a Duke Nukem game, Brainstorm for 0 Hour, and honestly that one was vastly better with multiple life support machines you had to take down. Crushers on bosses have likewise also been done much better on Doom, namely the map called Cyber Dreams. It's time to make like explosions in Map4H, got a blast! So it's another escape sequence map, not really any better than the Egyptian one, rather than requiring you to grab a keycard and having some crusher ceilings along the way. I'm actually not digging the random explosions. It makes actually staying and trying to fight the enemies untenable next to just bolting. My opinion's mostly the same, that probing the depths does this concept so much better since you have enough time to get your bearings and no need for random explosions. Maybe I'm being a bit harsh, I suppose they do what they're supposed to, but it's not like the concept can't be done with a more fleshed out map. Ultimately, they don't feel so much like actual maps as they are just one last semi-challenge to run past all the crap, and I will say the ending cutscene was at least pretty funny. It's time to snag some secrets in Map 1, Interstellar Intel. This map certainly makes it clear that this is not Duke 3D, the system probably couldn't handle that. That being said, it's a pretty decent starter map introducing troopers and pig cops. It's a bit linear, but at least has a secret to be found and at least retains jumping from Duke 3D. Also has some explosive barrels to have fun with, as well as a mission objective in the form of alien intel. All around, it does a pretty good job setting you up for things to come. Even if there isn't too much to speak of for length, it has a good amount of introducing mechanics. It's time to slice like an Egyptian in Map 2A, Egyptian Evisceration. Well, a plus is it reintroduces the Octobrain and Enforcer in addition to getting their rapid-fire melter for your own purposes. However, it's incredibly linear, pretty much just one door into the next, which is a shame because it would have been cool to have a pyramid to just explore around in a little. It does introduce a few concepts like lifts and lava, so that's pretty cool, but it feels like the map has no meat to it beyond just backtracking. I also find it weird that this game opts for a generic MP5 instead of the Duke 3D's Ripper. That was a much more interesting weapon. Ultimately, the map has some interesting additions and a nice aesthetic, but it's just too linear and short for its own good. It's time to deliver some size 13 boot in Map 3D, Doomsday Deliverance. I'll give it credit, at least it has a lot more going for it than the last map to have a timer actually including it in with this section's boss. It also has 4 switches to quickly press to deactivate a Doomsday weapon and has a nice earthquake effect going for it. The only downside though is that the map is incredibly short, just those 2 elements for the most part and it's over. At least it's pretty intense while it lasted, and adding a boss gives you something to have to overcome after you may think it's over. Overall, it's still not as lengthy as I'd like, but it produces a good amount of excitement for that brief ride. It's time to unveil some nosy wizards in Map4B Off the Cloak. Funny thing is the blue card is technically optional since the bridge leading back just goes back up if you get the blue door and trigger the cutscene. Past that, it's another mothership map that's completely linear but does look aesthetically pretty nice, this one in particular having glass windows with a view of Earth. If nothing else, the use of lava and the green alien textures is a nice touch, and those enforcers are pretty strategically placed to be a real nuisance. One thing that always kind of annoys me though is an unexpected point of no return. I really wish map designers didn't do that because I might have left items behind. Ultimately, it has some nice visuals, but being able to see the Earth doesn't really make up for the little annoyances the map has, and overall just not having as much to it as I feel it could. It's time to endanger our health in Map2B Environmental Hazard. It's a pretty good map, still a little linear, but at least it adds some interesting things like crusher ceilings. It has a more interesting use of the Egyptian theme overall than the previous one, mix of large and small rooms. Another cool addition is pipe bombs, acting exactly like they do in Duke 3D, so that can come in handy. I get that system limitations mean they can't go crazy with the map design, but more paths would be nice to have. Ultimately though, it's still a well-rounded map that makes good use of enemies and mechanisms overall and has good-looking rooms. It's time to grab some bacon for Map 4A, eggs over easy. It's a bit of a mixed bag. Just to get it out of the way, it's linear and I'm obviously not a big fan of that, though it does open up shortcuts. On the positives though, it has a nice sense of scale and nicely follows through on the Vine Alien aesthetic of Duke 3D, so I can overall say I feel favorably towards it. It has a new enemy in the form of spore eggs. Protozoid slimers these are not, but instead they just spit at you if you get too close. Another nice thing is you get the freeze thrower, though you can tell the GBA can't handle much at once because the weapon fires a lot slower and just instantly freezes most enemies. Overall, it's a pretty decent map with a nice alien aesthetic and a good variation of heights, but I just wish there were more branching paths or maybe more exploratory rooms.
It's time to get breaking in Map 1C Subway Smash!
While still not the most open-ended map, it's another moderate step up for map complexity. This includes having the resurrection hybrids in large numbers and having an actual boss monster. Not the hardest boss that just walks in a circle and launches some rockets, but a boss is a boss. The stakes have also been raised in the plot in the background too, armies of aliens to deal with before they extinct humanity. All in all, pretty good map and a pretty good finale to the first main area of the game. It's time to grab the last duplicate in Map 4G, save our clones. This is the boss map, which is basically the last real map of the game since I don't see the devoted sequence escapes as amounting to much as maps. It's alright as a map, it's certainly a lot better than Egypt's boss map since this is an actual boss and there's more to the map itself. That's not to say it's anything spectacular though it actually has branching paths in one case and a teleporter secret, so that's pretty nice. Of course, I'm still not the greatest fan of unexpected points of no return. This map is especially egregious because it's really easy to miss out on secrets you might actually want against the boss and it seems pretty unnecessary. Ultimately, it's still a pretty good final boss map, certainly a lot better than Duke 3D Stadium in terms of map design, but it still has some problems and isn't as sharp as it could be. It's time to type 1,000,000 words a minute in Map 4C, Duke Hacksum. This one actually feels a little refreshing in that at least it's different than just running from room to room gunning through aliens. This map primarily has searching around vents with the doors mostly locked from one side until you unlock them as shortcuts, which is always satisfying. Obviously, the downside is it leads to plenty of cramped spaces in said vents, which can veer unclaustrophobic, and the main rooms aren't very big either. I can't be too hard on it though, because at least it's something different to break up the monotony. Ultimately, it's a refreshing map with a different feel, even though I'd have liked a bit more breathing room to go with it. It's time to rush through the smoke in Map 1B Area 42. It's certainly a step up from the previous map, still not Duke 3D-esque, but I'd compare it to a decent Doom map. It at least introduces a unique enemy, a gray alien with a psychic attack that can resurrect the dead, aka Archviles. There's also teleporters that work, breakable toilets that you can't drink the geysers, and blinking lights. Overall, it's still not the beefiest, but it's escalated over the first and is more showing what it can do. Compromises have to be made, but it can still deliver on some decent map design. It's time to do what Duke does best in Map 4D, Bombshell Rescue. This map emphasizes crusher ceilings and hopping platforms for what that's worth. On the plus side, it gives it a nice sense of verticality, which is appreciated for a GBA FPS. The platforms, however, can be tricky getting to when you're into the lava if you miss one. It's mostly linear as seems to be the trend, but it has a few small optional paths at least. Interestingly, it even has a secret to get to a key more easily, though I initially only found it from the keys side. Ultimately, it isn't too impressive a map, but it does do some things to switch it up, so that's appreciated. It's time to rescue the family in Map 4F, Save the Sister. This one's technically a gauntlet map, but it's actually one I'm pretty impressed by despite still being on the linear end. It has a surprising amount of length to it, especially for Duke Nukem Advance, and the little island bridge with the switches was pretty cool. The only thing I wasn't as much a fan of was jumping platforms over lava, since it's pretty easy to fall in and take a ton of damage, but that's obviously a skill issue. It was a pleasant surprise, both in terms of sheer amount of difficulty and just being more complex than you'd expect. It's not just another enemy gauntlet, but takes advantage of Duke Nukem Advance's features. I'd say this is a fairly good penultimate map, not counting the escape sequence one, really throwing out the stops here. It's time to go to the next angular step in Map 4E in the 3rd degree. The general tells you to avoid engagements and the mission is conserve ammo, which sounds like a recipe for disaster. Thankfully, the game is just making stealth an option rather than mandatory, having alternate routes. You can choose to still ignore it and go in gunning if you want, but you'll burn ammo and probably health. Since the engine has back-facing enemies, this is viable too, and the enemies seem to be deaf. I'll admit it's probably the best of the mothership levels so far just because it gives you choices. It's time to burn at the speed of sound in Map4B Fast Fried. This is another very competent city map, including both a familiar Duke Burger and a relatively different Chinese restaurant. The Duke Burger looks pretty similar in layout to the Atomic Editions, albeit simplified for the GBA hardware. My only nitpick is it feels a bit more linear than the previous map, but it's still very fun to play through. As a nice bonus, you even get the Shrink Ray in this map, my favorite weapon in Duke 3D. All around, it's still easily one of the best maps in Duke Nukem Advance and further proof that Duke's at his best in a city environment. It's time to hit the asphalt in Map3A Urban Action. It's amazing, this is the first map I'd say actually feels like a Duke 3D map and not just Duke in some map. City maps are Duke's strength, and there's even a movie theater akin to Hollywood Horror Cause. Along with a gas station, store, and bar, it may not be as large as a Duke 3D map, chalk that up to system limitations, but it still has good variety. The gas station is just flat out optional and may not be the largest, but exploration is always appreciated. This is a shining light that shows that even within system limitations, you can still make a compelling Duke Nukem map. It's time to debrief Duke. I'm just going to say this is a very fun game and impressively captures a lot of Duke 3D elements for being a GBA game. That being said, perhaps it could have used disappearing corpses or some other trick because its map design seems to be somewhat compromised in the process. While the two city maps are definitely my favorite, Duke Nukem is just a natural fit for urban areas, even those feel a bit compromised compared to Duke 3D. The Duke Burger straight up looks like a very cut down form of the Atomic Edition map. It tries to incorporate some story elements, but you can sort of tell they ran out of ideas at the end since it's just Duke saving several clones of the same girl to pad it out a bit. Still, despite its faults, it's easily one of the best first-person shooters on the GBA, and I'd even say it's the best that uses original levels. It may not be as good as its bigger brother Duke 3D, but it does a pretty admirable job on the little 32-bit system.